Ahoy ahoy crew. Let's do a tier list of all of the instances currently available on NovaRO. Going from the S tier, which is the hardest instances, to D tier, which is the easiest instances. I'm rating this based off of the gear qualification. So S tier means it requires end game gear. A tier is a little bit less than end game. B tier is mid game. C tier is a bit less than mid. And D tier is early game. So to start us off, we have a full list of instances here. We will start with Pouring Village. Pouring Village, made for newbies, literally a leveling instance, instant D tier, easy peasy. Now we'll do actual difficult ones. Hey Sweetie is pretty easy. You do have the prerequisite quests. It is a 17.2 instance, but I'd say it's B tier. You have to fight a 5 million HP boss. As long as you can do that pretty quickly, you're good. Next up is Water Garden. My screen does not scroll down very well. Let me grab a couple instances here. There we go. All right, so Water Garden, normal. I would say is still kind of difficult compared to most instances. I'm going to say it's an A tier instance, mainly because you have to know some of the mechanics of the instance. It is possible to die often, even though I think once you get the hang of it, it's definitely more a B-tiered instance. Water Garden Hard, I'm going to put as a S tier, but I think once you get to know the instance, it would drop down a level. But as is, if it was like your first time doing it, I'd say S tier. Hidden Flower Garden Normal. This is somewhat difficult. You know, I'm going to move Hey Sweetie down to C and move the Water Gardens down. I think that's better. All right, and then Normal Hidden Garden is also a B tier. This is B because the boss, you need to burst it down because it heals up a lot. It has stupid mechanics. The hard mode has the same mechanics, but 500,000 times more HP. Literally a 300 million HP boss, and does 30k fixed damage in an area of effect. S tier. That is most definitely one of the harder instances. Lost in Time. I would say this is relatively easy. Not super easy for like newbies, but it's definitely one you can do early on. Core Mission is part of the episode 17.1. It's pretty easy. The boss does use Agi Up, which is probably the most difficult part, but overall, it's not too hard to do. Alright, OS Mission. This is the other instance that is part of 17.1. I would say this is actually a bit more difficult than the core mission because the boss can break your weapon, he casts Pneuma, and he can do quite a bit of damage. Also Earthquake. He's actually quite dangerous. So I'm going to say that's a B. Charleston Crisis. This is a sponge instance. They do... the monsters here and the MVP do some damage, but if you have leech gears on like a physical build, you almost... it's so easy to do. There's low mechanics. The mobs really just have a lot of HP, and that is all. Next we'll do Werner's Laboratory. This is part of the 16.2, I think it's 16.1. It's like the second half-ish of 16.1. Werner's Laboratory There's two parts to this. I didn't make a hard icon for it. The regular one, the story mode, where you fight Cutie, isn't too hard. Cutie is like, I say, between a C and a B. Fighting Seiren on the battle mode, that is an S tier. That is a difficult boss. Even fully end-geared, like, GXs can sometimes have difficulty. So you need to, like, one-shot, but if you delay a couple seconds on killing the boss, he can one-shot you instead, doing insane amounts of damage. Heart Hunter Warbase. This is a much easier instance, part of 16.1. I'd say the boss isn't that difficult. It's definitely, I think, a C tier instance. I think I'm gonna run out of room. I'll figure that out later. Alright, Sky Fortress. This is another pretty spongy instance like Charleston Crisis, but the mobs here are more of a threat. The boss has a insta-kill mechanic. You have to dodge earthquakes and stuff. I would say B or A. It's definitely B or A. It's harder than these instances would be, but I think you need... I think mid-game gear could do it as long as you know what you're doing. As long as you learned the mechanics of the instance, I think it's B. But if you don't know it, it's probably an A. So we'll say like in between B and A. Now let's be decisive. I'll say B. Room of Consciousness. This is not that difficult. I think it's actually quite easy. Especially because you can defeat the boss without actually fighting the boss, because the NPCs will help you deal damage. So it's not too difficult. Definitely doable by low-geared players. Half Moon in the Daytime. This instance is, I'm going to say, a B tier. It can be a little bit difficult at times, especially if you're unprepared. And this kind of makes me think maybe Sky Fortress is an A tier. I think I'll put Sky Fortress A tier. I'll move that up there. Half Moon in the Daytime is a mid-gear instance. It feels like it should be for C or D, like early game stuff, but it's really not. You need a little bit of gear to really do the instance. Otherwise, you can have difficulties to accomplish it. King's Heel. This is the updated or reworked Charleston Crisis. It's basically the same thing. It's just going to go exactly with Charleston Crisis. On top of it, to save room, because they're basically the same. Dreams and Shadows. This I would put in C tier. I think it's overall pretty easy, but because some of the monsters spam reverberation, the boss can do damage. I think it's a B tier instance because there is threat of dying to even the basic mobs. They also use Hammerfall a lot, which can stun you. So it's not, I think not meant for early game. It's more mid game. Though you can probably do it in between C and B. But I'm going to put it at B just to be not in between on everything. Central Laboratory. This is a gamble, I think, because you get 3 random MVPs that spawn, and sometimes you can get Ifrit and Beelzebub and like like Randgris. Those are difficult. Those are like A, probably like A tier. Sometimes you can get Angeling and Buaya or not Buaya, Bayea? But the banana plant monster that has like 200,000 HP. This I'm going to put in B because I think it will average in B. But it can be A sometimes. It'll jump between depending on your RNG. Last Room. This is definitely a little bit more difficult. Central Laboratory and Last Room are both part of the 15.1 episode. Last Room, I'm going to say, is A tier because the boss can be difficult to fight for early game players. I think maybe if you're fully prepared for it, maybe it could be B, but I think A tier is more justified. Fall of Glass Time, normal mode. This is, I'm going to say B. The plant monsters inside of it, or the skeleton plants, they shoot a lot of bolts at you and they do a lot of damage. As well as some of the monsters use agi up. They're rare to spawn, but if they do, that can also cause difficulty, especially for early game. So this is definitely B. Whereas the hard mode, I think I want to say S, but I don't. You do have to kind of burst the boss down because he will heal up pretty fast. I think A is fine. I might change that later. I think A is good for now. Alright, Bioresearch Laboratory. This is definitely an S tier. It is one of the harder instances. You need, definitely need end game gear to really do this instance. At least complete it and get the actual rewards from it. Bios Island, Morse Cave, and Temple of the Demon God. Bios Island, I think, is, I would say, mid-game. Purely because of the boss fight. He's a bit of a sponge, but he does do quite a bit of damage. You have to dodge the comet, because the comet he cast will murder you. So B tier for that. That's mid-game. Morse Cave, I would say, I think it's also mid-game. One of the bosses does have like 50 million HP, but if you use fire property against him, he does take like ×2 damage. As long as you're prepared with potions or leech gear, you should be good. Definitely mid-game. Maybe A. I don't know. I think I'll say, yeah, we'll go A. And then Temple of the Demon God, where you fight Morok in his god form. It feels weird to put it up here with Laboratory and Flower Garden, but I think it does require end game gear. Maybe the same amount that Fall of Glass Time does. Maybe, yeah, Fall of Glass Time is up here as well. I'll keep Morse Cave as an A. I think that's better. Now, Nightmarish Jitterbug. There's also, where is it? Am I missing? Oh no, I already did Dreams and Shadows. Nightmarish Jitterbug is the first version of Dreams and Shadows. It's a bit longer than Dreams and Shadows, but it has all like the same monsters, the same content, the same maps basically. It's just a longer version with more monsters. That's really all it is. Faceworm Nest. This one I think is a bit above mid-game. The boss can be somewhat complicated to kill, but I think it's not always that complicated. Is Faceworm Nest easier than Fall of Glass Time, Central Lab, normal Flower Garden, normal Water Garden? I think it's roughly on par. I think it could almost slip into A, but I think B tier is where it belongs. I don't think it's quite A. As long as you understand the boss casts Earthquake and changes its properties. Sarah's Memory. This is free +6 stat food, really good XP for any, like, you get a decent amount for what the instance is. Anything below level like 180. or if you have a homunculus, it's pretty good XP. Definitely D tier, very easy. Ghost Palace, another very easy instance. It allows you to get Thanatos weapons, which are crucial for the early to mid game. Another easy instance. It's, I would say, harder than Sarah's Memory, but still easier than these other instances here. Devil's Tower. I'd say this is mid-game. Yeah, this is mid-game. You fight a bunch of shadow monsters. You fight a big boss. You get a NPC mercenary to help you. There isn't too much to it. Yeah, pretty easy. Airship Assault. This is another one. I think it's another C tier. Well, no. The boss is super squishy and does literally no damage. This is D tier, but I think it's above Ghost Palace and Sarah's Memory. Geffen Magic Tournament. If we consider Fenrir as like the difficult part of this, or Fenrir, Dwy, and what's the third mini boss? I think it starts with a K. Oh well, I don't remember, but I'm going to say this is a mid-game instance. Now we've run out of room in the mid-game. Sarah and Fenrir. This one requires knowledge to know how to do it, I think. I don't think it's overly difficult, but I think it requires a bit more than mid-game gear to easily complete. But it is completable on mid-game gear, so I'm going to put it in mid-game. That's another one that's kind of in between, but I don't want to do none of that in-between stuff. These 6 next. We'll do Overlook Water Dungeon. This, very easy instance. D tier. It's not really an instance, it's more like dungeons, and you just hunt monsters that are quests, and you get rewarded with a fish card of your choosing. Legacy of Glasstime. This is S tier, obviously. It's like the hardest content we have on NovaRO. I think I'd even say it's harder than Monster Hunter. It is very difficult. Now, Monster Hunter, this does not represent Monster Hunter 2. I am not including that here. If I did, Monster Hunter 2 would also be in the S tier. This is Monster Hunter 1, where you get the first set of Shadow Gear. I would say this is also a mid-game instance. Endless Tower. We'll go grab Endless Cellar as well. Do both of those at the same time. They're roughly the same thing, same concept, just different monsters inside. I think these are A tier. For completing the whole thing is A tier. If you're only doing parts of it, you can probably do it on mid-game, maybe even a little bit on early to mid, but A tier for completion purposes. Horror Toy Factory. This one, I think, is also an A tier. I think with certain classes, you can get by on mid-game gear. It also requires a little bit of knowledge on how the max pain works. Infinite Space. It's like Endless Tower, Endless Cellar, but a smaller version with some different mobs and some other things to it. I think there's also a hard mode to this. I'm going to say I think both are like mid-game, require mid-game. I think because of the bosses, it requires mid-game. Normal, if you exclude the bosses, you could probably do it with like pretty low gear. But hard mode, I think, is definitely mid-game. And then the normal mode bosses make it also mid-game. So I'm going to say mid-game overall for B. Alright, we have 6 more left, and then these down here, which I'll explain in a minute. Oh god, I've just stretched all these images. What have I done? Alright, old glass time, hard. Old glass time, normal, I think requires... if we're going off completion purposes, it's a mid-game. You can definitely do it, and maybe half of it, in the C tier of gear. Like a bit above early game. Maybe even a little bit at early game. But to complete it, you do need some gear. I think hard mode is A tier. It's a bit more than mid-game, but not that much more. Now, Friday instance. The instance you can only do on Friday, which is commonly forgotten by lots of people. Mainly because you can only do it on Friday and you forget about it. Friday normal mode, I would say, is also a mid-game instance with the rest of these. There was quite a bit of mid-game-y stuff. Hard mode, to do the boss fight, you'll need probably a bit above mid-game gear. He casts Meteor Storm, which does outrageous amounts of damage, can randomly one-shot you. I'm half convinced it's a one-shot mechanic. I think it's just a lot of damage, though. He also casts Agi Up, which is quite annoying. And now, Hazy Forest. This is a rather simple instance. Confusing, simple, but it's not D. I don't even think I'd say C tier. Because the mobs will actually beat you up, and they do a considerable amount of damage for being a relatively old instance now. I'm gonna say mid-game because without proper gear, you're going to die to the mobs most of the time. The boss isn't very scary, but the regular mobs will eviscerate you. Not saying that like this is on the same level as these other instances, really. As in, like, it doesn't give good rewards or anything. But I feel like it is a relevant instance still. Not like meta-wise, but it's still there. It's still a way to get Mora coins. It's also a way to find certain mobs. But definitely requires a bit of gear to really do. I think maybe I can put it down here. If you're prepared for the monsters. We'll say C tier. Melangdo Culvert, where you fight Coasalanth. I think I got it. Coasalanth, and you get Deep Sea... Hold on. Deep Sea God Anger? No. Sea God's Anger, which is used to enchant various weapons. I think it's relatively easy, but there is quite a bit of mobs to clear. I think it could be mid-game. I think it's a bit more than C tier. And then Wolf Chev's Laboratory. Nowadays, if you're geared, the bosses that spawn, it spawns a random Bio 4 boss. It's basically just a boss fight. I think you need between mid to end game gear to really kill it. You might need end game, but I think A tier is good enough for that. If you're unprepared and you're not looking when the mob spawns, you'll die probably pretty fast. The mobs are still dangerous. You can out-potion some of them. You get stripped a lot sometimes, and it's very in between. I think A tier is more justified. And then these instances down here, I feel are irrelevant or don't offer anything, really. There's no reason to write these. I've also never really done the Port Malaya cycle. Octopus Cave gives you very little in rewards. Desert Island is for a costume basically only. The Jolly Roger headgear. Sealed Shrine, you'll see in weekly quests sometimes. I think there's an item or two here that's okay. Maybe I will rate Sealed Shrine. Orc Memory, also another one there's not really a lot there. Nidhogger's Nest. My problem with this instance is I have followed a few different guides. The Nova Wiki guide, the guide on IRO Wiki. I can't get the instance to open, ever. I've done all the stuff, I spent multiple hours trying to get it to work. I can't get the instance to work. I assume some point is bugged, but I don't know what point it is. So I don't even know how to report it as a bug. Or if anybody else has done this instance recently. So I can't even rate this one. It's a E tier. Undoable. Sealed Shrine, I think requires mid-game gear because of the boss fight. If you're in a party, the boss is super easy. The boss will melt fast. But as a standalone difficulty, if you can't burst the boss down, which is I think it's around 6 million HP, 6 to 8. If you can't burst it down, you have to activate a bunch of seals. If you're alone, he'll cast Agi up and he'll follow you to each area. You have to spam potions all the way there. It's a burden to do, not worth doing unless your weekly quest is that week on Sealed Shrine. But I think it's mid-game gear to actually do it properly. And I think that is it for my instances from hardest to easiest. D being the instances you do early on. C being the ones you can advance onto. When you get a bit more gear, you start getting Thanatos weapons, all that stuff. B is your mid-game, when you can start doing completing a lot of these instances. A tier when you can start doing these ones, and S tier when you're at maxed end game and can do all the harder content. Keep in mind, this does not consider partying. If you party, Temple of the Demon God, Fall of Glass Time, Bioresearch Laboratory, Werner's Laboratory, Hidden Flower Garden, these can all be done much easier than end game gear. It's all looked at from a more solo perspective, and just how difficult the bosses are, really. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, subscribe to the channel, share this video with friends, and I'll see you in the next video.